right, everyone, let's talk about forced unwrapping. Now, forced unwrapping is not really considered a good practice when you are programming in Swift language. And the reason is actually pretty simple. Let's go ahead and take a look at an example. So if I go ahead and create a name over here, a name variable, and I don't really assign any value, or I can assign a value if I want to, but if I don't assign the value over here, the string value by default will be nil, right? Or even int, I guess, in this case, because it's optional. If I go ahead and try to print out or force unwrap it, I mean, if I print it out right now over here, it will simply say nil. But if I try to force unwrap it, then it's going to be a problem, right? Because you can't really force unwrap it. It's going to just crash. Force unwrapping basically means that you're trying to get a value out of the optional, but it doesn't really have the value because you've never really assigned it. Now, what about if I do assign a value? Can I then force unwrap it? Yes, in those cases, you can force unwrap it, as you can see, and it will unwrap and give you the value. Now, you have to be very careful whenever you're doing force unwrapping, because whenever you do force unwrapping and you don't have the value, like it's nil or something, then it is going to blow up. So you have to be careful of understanding that the value will have something in there. So another example that most people do is when they are creating a URL. So let's say that they have a certain URL and they can say HTTPS and their server URL, whatever the URL is, server.com, whatever. And this is going to return you, if you print out the URL, as optional. And they can completely unwrap it. Now, if they unwrap it over here, they have to be 100% sure that the URL will have a value. Now, in this case, the URL does have a value. Now, this URL may be, what about if this URL is incorrect or something? What about if I say something like this? Will it still give me that particular thing? If I go ahead and print out the URL, what will happen? Is it going to blow up, or is it going to just give me DDD? And it does give me like that particular thing, all right? So, and if I put it something else, then I'll get that URL. So what about if I don't have the URL? What about if I have it something like this? And there we go. So again, you're trying to force unwrap it over here, and you didn't really provide it the URL. So it's going to tell you that there is some problem, and you need to make sure that you provide the correct URL, all right? And in those cases, you can definitely see that it's going to blow up as it is blowing up right now. It's telling you that you can't do that because you didn't really provide it a string. Now, if I provide some sort of a string over here, then it's all okay. It's like, okay, that's fine. You can use it. So that's why it's really important to know, to find out that the thing that you're trying to unwrap, it does exist. Because if it doesn't exist, then it's going to just blow up. Your whole app can crash at that point. All right. So even if you're using force unwrapping, don't just try to use it like every place. If you have to use it somewhere, then obviously make sure that the thing that you are unwrapping, the value for that thing does exist. All right. So even though this is a operator in Swift that you can use, you have to be very careful when you are using force unwrapping. And a lot of different places, if you're using Swift UI and you're trying to force unwrap something, your previews are not going to work. It's going to just blow up because, it depends on the value, and now you're force unwrapping it. So it's going to crash. The same error, the nil error is going to happen, and your previews are also not going to work. So make sure that if you are using this technique, first of all, don't use it unless you have the last resort. But if you are using it, try to make sure that the value that you're trying to unwrap, or the thing that you're trying to unwrap, contains a value. So that is the force unwrapping.